Hi, welcome back. We're here again with Michael Ventura. We're sometime in the early 70s, and I'm going to let him take it from here. Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, Brendan. Let's see, we're right around the spring of 1972, and I was working in Boston as a secretary, because I think I said that it wasn't okay for men to have typing jobs in Boston, but I got one anyway, because didn't want to work out in 5 degrees, and I could type very fast and very accurately. And so I worked for a bit over a year there, getting up a stake, paying off some debts, being not in New York and not anywhere else, just dowdy old Boston. And when I finally did decide, because as I'm sure I've said, when I was in high school, I watched Route 66. And really, all I wanted after watching that show about two guys who just go around the United States working here and there, searching for they don't know exactly what, but searching. That's all I ever wanted to do besides write. I didn't want to sign up for a normal life. I didn't want to fit in or not fit in. I didn't think about it that way. I just didn't see a life around me that I wanted to do. I didn't see people around me, men around me, whom I respected. It's not about that. But that I wanted to be like. I certainly didn't want to work 9 to 5 the rest of my life. And, for a salary, just be a working stiff. I respect work. I respect working stiffs. But I didn't want to do it. And so I lit out, finally, sometime in June, I think it was. It's funny that I don't remember exactly the day even, but because it was a momentous day. 1972, and I got a drive-away car. Now, I don't know if they still have them, but if you wanted your car to be moved from Manhattan to, say, San Fernando Valley, for whatever reason, there was this agency drive away, and they would vet sort of lightly somebody who wanted to drive the car. And you could get a job driving somebody's car from Manhattan to San Fernando Valley. You agreed to just take 5 days, and they paid you something. You paid for everything else, and it was a great way to get across the country. Now, I just learned to drive, and the car that I think we did talk about this a little. The car that I drew was a Pontiac Firebird, a brand new Pontiac Firebird, way too much car for me. And I drove first to Cleveland to see a girl, and then to Chicago to meet Nelson Algren, whom I'd written to. Now, Nelson Algren, and Brendan can stop me if I told this story. I don't think I did. Nelson Algren wrote The Man with the Golden Arm. He wrote Walk on the Wild Side. We copped the phrase for the song, but Nelson Algren coined it. He wrote The Neon Wilderness, a book of short stories. And I'd contacted him. He lived in Chicago. I'd asked if I could see him on the way west. Chicago's where Route 66 started. It goes south into Oklahoma and then goes west. And he said, yeah. And there he was, living in a third story of a tenement in a raunchy neighborhood of Chicago. And here's this man who published very good books, who'd had movies made of his books. They weren't good movies, but had movies made. who'd had a literary reputation, especially in France, where then he'd romanced Simone de Beauvoir away from Jean-Paul Sartre for a while. He must have been in his mid-60s. Tall guy, knew the street, and was a beautiful writer. Just a beautiful writer.
I gotta say, before you go on any further, I like the film version of The Man with the Golden Arm, but one thing that I always found very funny about that movie was how Frank Sinatra kicks heroin in one day.
Yes. Well, it's a movie. I like the film version of that too. Walking on the Wild Side is a silly movie, but and Sinatra does a good job, I thought, in that The Man with the Golden Arm. But kicks heroin in one day. Well, Nelson Ogren didn't exactly approve of the movie, but and somebody like Otto Preminger directed it. At the same time, in fairness, it was a big deal to have a big star do a movie about a drug addict.
Yeah, I bet.
In the mid-50s, that was a big deal, to bring that kind of thing to the fore. And there was Nelson Ogren, and I'd written him an entertaining letter, but when I met him, I was just tongue-tied. I was a very boring guest, and I felt very self-conscious about it. He made me a pallet on the floor. There he was in this tenement kind of apartment that he kept up nice, but we went out for an Italian dinner. I just was a boring guest. I felt so bad about it. But there he was, and I asked him, I said, "Are you writing anything?" And he said, "No, the shelves are full of John Updike and Saul Bellow, and that's the kind of stuff they want out there. I'm not writing anything." And I thought, wow, I hope that if I get to where he is in terms of age, that I can still write just because I'm a writer, just because I'm writing. I hope if it can happen to Nelson Ogren, it can happen to me, but I hope I don't break the way he has. I didn't blame him for it. I didn't think less of him for it. He put his heart out there, and his observations, and he had an influence. His work has had an influence on my life. I thanked him for it. But I hoped that I was a little tougher when I got older. You can't... The writing life is a very hard life. Sitting down and writing, facing a blank page, is a very hard thing to do. Even very talented people sometimes don't do it very long. And a lot of people who say they're going to do it often don't do it at all. Or they try a little bit and then they stop. So I don't fault anybody for deciding, I don't want to do this. I mean, Ginger Varney wrote wonderfully for years for the LA Weekly and just turned around and said, "Nah, I don't want to do this anymore. It's too hard." I became a private investigator and did well at that. But there I was with a writer whom I respected greatly, a writer who wrote for the underclass, wrote about them, knew them, came from that, and basically he quit. He stopped. And that was a great example to me of what the price was going to be, and that writing was going to have to be enough. That the doing of it was going to have to be enough. And anything else that happened with getting published, with getting famous, with getting money, as improbable as that was from where I was at that time, that was all something that would happen or not happen, but writing was going to have to be enough all the way. If you wanted something with it, anything that came with it could also be taken away. Writing couldn't be taken away. writing, what you went through to write it, that couldn't be taken away. And so meeting Nelson Algren was a big deal for me. I wrote him, when I got to California, a letter apologizing for being so boring. And he wrote back a very funny letter that I wish I could quote from. I can't remember it. And he sent me a signed copy of a paperback of The Neon Wilderness that I still have. And he was very gracious. So that's class. You know, he may have been broken as a writer, but he never lost his class. And there I was in California. At first I was around Santa Cruz and Oakland, Garrett in Oakland, on my unemployment, on all the money I'd saved, living on next to nothing. And writing, I registered to vote in California for the 1972 election at a firehouse, and in Oakland or Berkeley, and I wrote for occupation writer, and that was a big deal. It sounds like a little thing now, but that was a big deal.
What was the environment like in the East Bay at that time?
Well, in Berkeley and around the university, I liked to go to the art museum that they had then, and they had a little cafe that was not pretentious at all. And I would have my notebook, and I'd have whatever book I was reading, because I was always reading a book. And I would sit at the table, and I think, as I said last time, you know, you got coffee refills in the West, and I was just still amazed at that. And there was a young woman who ran the coffee shop, Latina, and she'd give me the coffee refills. And after a while, I'd be hanging out there, and I was very shy, and I didn't talk with my notebook and my book. And I'd come almost every day for 2-3 hours, and walked about 2 miles from where I was living, 3 miles, walk. And a thick piece of buttered whole wheat baked bread would appear on a plate, and I looked at her, and she just put up her hand silently. It was just saying to me, you know, eat, don't worry about it. I mean, I was really skinny, about 120 pounds, and so that part of the atmosphere was very, very friendly for me. But I'd be walking along, and there'd be young white people looking very hippie-ish, even though that time had passed. And they'd be on, I guess it's Telegraph Avenue there, panhandling. And I thought I'd probably have less money than they did. but in the morning, I would press my pants. I would press my shirt. I would be damned if I was ever going to beg or look like them. I even got a haircut. I didn't want to be associated with that. But the atmosphere, besides being kind of grungy, Berkeley was kind of grungy then, was pretty calm. I walked the streets of Oakland and Berkeley all hours of the day and night. Walked and walked and walked. I didn't have a TV, you know. You can only read and write so much. And I never felt like I was in danger. I never felt any kind of, you know, or no more danger than I'd been in New York City for sure. But so the atmosphere was kind of mellow. The big exciting time was over. It didn't look like there was going to be another exciting time. The campus at Berkeley was, you know, bustling, but no big event. And I didn't get to San Francisco much. I would hitchhike over there I remember I spent some money to go see a revival theater, Fellini's La Strada. I'd never seen it before. And I mean, it only cost about $1.50 to get in. And I hitchhiked back to my garret. And all of that was solitary and walking around. I'd go down to see Duke and Sarah. They were in Santa Cruz, but I didn't want to live with them. And I'd stop and see David and Ann Johnson. They were in Berkeley on Ashby Avenue. But I didn't want to live with them. I don't think they wanted me to live with them either. And I was where I wanted to be, just doing what I wanted to do, and realizing there's going to be a dead end to this. I'm going to have to get a job, some kind of job. But it hadn't happened yet. And then Mikey Berger let me know he was getting... And remember, also, in this time, long-distance calls were expensive. And there wasn't any next-day delivery of mail. There was special delivery that cost a fortune. The means of communication that you have now were non-existent. This was 50 years ago. I mean, literally 50 years ago. And if you were that far gone from the people you knew, you were gone. You know, every couple of weeks, maybe I'd call my mother. We'd talk for about 3 or 4 minutes. But we couldn't afford any more than that. You know, that would be $2 or $3 or $4. And if you're living on, you know, like $4 a day, which was possible. You know, $4 a day could buy you a pack of cigarettes and a couple of meals. But you couldn't spend it on a phone call very often. And I wrote letters. My mother wrote letters to me. I wrote letters to my friends back east. They wrote letters to me. Letter writing was still a very big deal. And I got a letter from Mikey saying that he and a woman named Martha were getting married in Nashville, where they were both getting their PhDs at the university there. And I went, I'm going to go to that wedding. No, I hadn't been to Dave Johnson's wedding, and I hadn't been to Duke's wedding. And I imagine Dave and Ann were pissed at this, but I decided I wanted to be at Mikey's wedding. And I had $100 left. He was getting married in the middle of January. And Duke said, my idea was to get on a Greyhound. And Duke said, now with $100, you could buy these new Hollybar down jackets, one of those. And you could hitchhike in the winter. It comes with a hood. I had work boots that were pretty good. That's what I wore then. And you could hitchhike to Nashville. If you get a Greyhound to Nashville, you're going to get off there. It's going to be the winter, and it's going to be real cold, and you're not going to have $100. That made sense. I got a Hollybar. Brendan, I still have this jacket. I lost the hood somewhere along the way, but I still have the jacket. And I was writing a play for an outfit called the Magic Theater. They didn't know I was writing the play for them, but I had intended to bring the play to them. Called Mimo. I still have the manuscript. Thank God nobody ever saw it. And I don't mean it was produced. They never saw the manuscript. And Duke and Sarah, it was Christmas Eve day, and Duke and Sarah were getting in their car, a little Saab that Duke had, that I told you about, to go to a friend of theirs, the Tankersleys, in San Francisco to have Christmas Eve dinner and Christmas the next day. And I was going to work. They were going to be out of a little cottage in Santa Cruz, and I was going to work. And as they were going down the street, a voice, literally I felt it as a voice, said, get in that car, it'll change your whole life. And I ran down the street and got in the car. They dropped me off at Dave and Ann's because they'd invited me for Christmas Eve dinner, Christmas. And staying with them were Irene Gilbert and a guy named Crash. Irene had been in Lubbock, Texas, and she was from the East. And Crash had said, so she was with, had said he'd never seen the sea. And she said, well, let's go to San Francisco to my friend Anne, and you'll see the sea. And they did. And that dinner, they said, what are you doing? And I told them I'm finishing this play, and then I'm lighting out for Nashville. And Crash said, come with us to Lubbock. It's more than halfway. And on New Year's Eve day in the morning, they picked me up in Santa Cruz. And off we went to Lubbock, Texas. Basically the biggest thing that ever happened in my life, the thing that changed my whole life. I mean, aside from being born and that kind of thing. So we drove the coast road, stopping to see sharks on the beach and whales in the distance, and it was a pretty, pretty day. Down to San Luis Obispo, and then got 101. That turned into the Hollywood Boulevard somewhere, the Hollywood Freeway. I remember driving through Hollywood. And my God, this is Hollywood, LA. Wow. Right around midnight, we stopped in Blythe on the Arizona border in the wee hours. And they said a storm was coming. We didn't pay much attention to it. And I remember we were at a diner, and the waitress said, where are you people going? And Crash said, Texas. And she said, Texas? I wouldn't go there if I was dying. And we went through, following night, we were getting toward El Paso, and the storm warnings were really clear. And we didn't stop at a hotel or anything. We took turns driving, sleeping in the back seat. And this was Motel 6 had just started. And it was called Motel 6 because it only cost $6 originally, when motels were like $10 and $15. We didn't have, between us, we didn't have the money to stay in a motel. $6 was a lot of money. Gas was only about 25 cents a gallon. And we were in a Volkswagen, Irene's Volkswagen Bug. It didn't use much gas. And the winter storm got to us in New Mexico, but we kept going. And we passed El Paso just when they decided to close the pass because the storm was getting too bad. We were one of the last cars through. And then we were really in it, this enormous storm. One of the few winter storms that have ever gotten as far south as El Paso. And we were on I-20 and headed to Fort Worth. We'd turn off of that and go up on 84 to go to Lubbock. And it took forever. We were, not only were we driving a snow-packed highway at about 10 miles an hour, literally, but the windshield wipers didn't work. The defroster didn't work. And we had a bottle of vodka, not exaggerating this at all. We had a bottle of vodka. And what we do is stop every 10 miles or so, and we couldn't see, and carefully pour the vodka across the top of the windshield, and the vodka would melt the ice, and we'd proceed. A truck, you know you're in trouble on the highway when you are the only car on the highway. Everything else is trucks. They're blowing snow in your face. A truck in front of us jackknifed. We didn't have cell phones. There was no way to call anybody. We stopped in the next town and told them about it. And we got to Lubbock, Texas, the morning of January 2nd. It was bright, clear, and there was like 3 feet of snow on the ground. And two things were clear. One, I wasn't going anywhere for a few days because Lubbock was iced in. The other thing that was clear is that Irene's friends were not like anybody else I'd ever known. Living at this house on 14th Street in Avenue EW were people who have since become famous, and some people who haven't should have. All in one house. Butch Hancock, Jimmy Dale Gilmore, Joe Ely, Sharon Thompson, who became Sharon Ely, Debbie Fields, Laura Hunt, and other people just passing through there or visiting who lived in town. Deborah Milosevic, wasn't Milosevic yet. Chick Club, Terry and Jerry Thompson, the Supernatural Family Band, Tommy Hancock and his family, David Halley, and on. And they talk about their friends who I hadn't yet met, who weren't living in Lubbock, Terry Allen and Joe Harvey Allen, Joe Carroll Pierce. And they were playing music. Butch and Jimmy Dale. Joe came later. I didn't meet him right that first time. And they were playing songs that were as good as any I was hearing anywhere, and here they were, just in Lubbock, Texas. All of us chipping in on rent that was ridiculously small. Eating, Sharon could make beans and cornbread like you couldn't imagine. It was the most beautiful smell I'd ever smelled. First time she was making beans and cornbread. And I remember she said, you ain't had beans and cornbread, honey? You must have starved. And I'm thinking, actually, we did kind of starve when I was a kid. We didn't know about beans and cornbread. And Jeanette Norman, Vicki Vaughn, and about the second night I was there, everybody decided to go dancing. And there was a club and there was a cover band, but it was pretty wild. And the Texas ladies, they weren't used to men dancing with them. Their men, the musicians' friends, didn't dance. I almost never knew a white musician who danced. But I danced. I danced good. so they were glad to have me around.
So this is a honky tonk.
These gals. Say it again.
So there's a honky tonk.
Well, that's a good question. This honky tonk wasn't very big. It was very Texan. The band was very country. It wasn't a band anybody ever heard of outside of that. The band was very country. And it was mostly country music, and everybody knew the words, and everybody sang along. And me, I was just absolutely fluent. And the Lubbock accent. Now, accents have kind of smoothed out all over the country since, including these people who had very strong accents at the time. But they kind of talked like this, and every sentence seemed to be ending in a question mark right in the middle. And I didn't know what they were talking about. I didn't know. And so the other thing about this house is that it was full of books that I'd never read, never even heard of. Now, I was a New York smartass, and I read and read and read and read and read. I read history, I read sociology, I read psychology, I read novels, I read poetry. Here were all these books that I'd never seen. Idris Shah's books on Sufis, a whole little library of them. Many books on esoteric Christianism of one kind or another. Gurdjieff, all kinds of books about Gurdjieff, Krishnamurti. And the talk was so often about this or that guru, this or that philosopher. And at the same time, there was Butch Hancock and Jimmy Dale Gilmore singing these great songs just in the living room. And I had sense enough to know, and we were all about the same age. I mean, Butch and Jimmy and Irene were born in 1945 the way I was. Jeanette was about 2 years older. Joe was about 1 year younger. Joe Ely. All basically war babies, not boomers. A boomer can remember their first television. A boomer can't remember their first television. Televisions were all in their houses by the time boomers came along, which is about 47, 48. War babies can't remember their first. I'm getting a big stuff. War babies remember vividly their first TV because we weren't born into TV. TV came along when we were 4, 5, 6 years old, depending on where you were. And so we were all part of the same sort of interim generation. Our parents came to maturity in the Depression and the war, World War II. So here I am with these books that I'd never heard of. I'd never remotely. And the first book I picked up the first morning, because I woke up earlier than everybody else, and it was just at a sleeping bag, and I was on the floor, and I just reached to the book, nearest book, and it was Gurdjieff. Like I said, I'd never heard of him. Meetings with Remarkable Men. These books knocked my head around. And the way people were talking about them knocked my head around. These people were interested in philosophies and spiritualities that, to put it mildly, were not East Coast. East Coast intellectualism was very hard-ass, very Marxist, very socially conscious, blah, blah, blah. The blah, blah, blah isn't a put-down. It was a great background for me. But I'd never heard of this other stuff. I'd never heard of Sufis. Islam wasn't a thing America thought about in those days. And certainly never heard of Gurdjieff. And they had Gurdjieff and I can't remember the name of the cat who wrote about Gurdjieff, who was one of his disciples. I can't remember them right now. And Boyhood with Gurdjieff and blah, 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 all these Gurdjieff books. And, as I say, all these Christian mysticism books, esoteric Christianism.
Do you remember any of the authors of the Christian mysticism?
I really don't.
Yeah.
It was the part I was least interested in at the time.
Yeah.
Because, I'd heard of Christian.
Well, it's a big interest for me. So yeah.
Let's see. There was one I can see the cover. Oh boy, the Akashic Records.
Yeah. Don't worry about it.
No, I won't worry about it. But so this was this whole different philosophy in a place that was completely different from everything I'd known. This music that was totally different from anything I'd done. And not that Duke and I didn't listen to country music, we did, but kind of obvious country music, Johnny Cash kind of thing. These people were steeped in really the traditions of country music in a way that I'd never been exposed to. Plus rock and roll, plus blues, plus this and that, but they were steeped in this stuff. There was a record, Jimmy Dale had a record of Lord Buckley that was great. I'd never heard of Lord Buckley. And then we went 2 icy nights later, the whole crowd went to the Cotton Club to hear a band. I think it was Delbert McClinton that we heard, who would have been very young, as young as we were. Now, the Cotton Club was a legendary club. It didn't serve booze. You brought your own. You brought your own setups. Whiskey it didn't serve. It served beer, I believe. It was out of the county line, so it was you rode a ways to get there on these 2 lanes. was the biggest nightclub for many, many, many years between Dallas and L.A. And the young Elvis Presley, before he made records, played there often. Bob Will and the Texas Playboys played there. It was a famous club if you knew that kind of music. And it was a raunchy club. It was rare that a fight did not break out in that club of some kind or another. And what I didn't understand is that these new people I was meeting did not think I was white. They did not have any kind of experience of Sicilians or Italians. They thought I was Mexican. And Ventura is a Spanish name as well as an Italian and Sicilian name. I was wearing, as J. Club would say, we didn't know what to make of you with those Pachuco loafers you had on. And to them, they thought I was Mexican. I had no idea about this for years. And it was very unusual for them, for the ethnicities to mix. It was unusual for a Mexican, quote unquote, to be at the Cotton Club. They didn't show me any kind of exclusion whatsoever. I was welcomed completely. But they did think I wasn't white. Now, I went to, this comes later in the year, I went to a barber on Main Street, because I got haircuts in those days. And an old barber, white, and when he was doing the back of my neck, he pressed that electric cutter into my neck so that he broke the skin. I thought he was just an old guy who couldn't help it. And I didn't quite know what to do, but I just took it and let him do it. And I tipped him. I had a sense something was off, but I didn't know what. I got back to 14th Street, and Jacob said, Michael, he didn't want any Mexicans in his barbershop. You were being told never to come back. And if you'd have complained, people would have just laughed. So, there was that. In any case, sooner or later, the town opened up again, and the highways opened up. I guess I spent about a week in Lubbock. And I had just enough money for a Greyhound to get to Nashville in time for the wedding. And I got on a Greyhound and got to Nashville. Hitchhiked from Nashville to New York, saw my family. Hitchhiked from New York to Boston, saw some friends. Now I was reading Gurdjieff, and now I was reading The Education of Henry Adams, because it was on my sister's bookshelf in the Bronx. She was going to Bronx Science at the time. And it was blowing me away because of Henry Adams' predictions about history, his theory of history, which is in the last several chapters of that book. And I was curious to walk on the streets where he grew up in Boston. I also was going to Boston to see friends, but I was walking, and I ran into a guy who had been a co-counselor with me at the camp I'd been a counselor at in the early 60s. I hadn't seen him in 10 years. And I said, Thomas, what are you up to? And he said, well, I'm about to drive to New Mexico. I said, drop me off in Lubbock. And that's exactly how it happened. And Thomas dropped me off in Lubbock. And Jamie was, I remember we got there, it's like dinner was just being served. You could smell the beans and cornbread. And there was Jimmy with his guitar and Butch with his guitar sitting in a kind of circle in the living room. And the people eating. And I walked in, and Jimmy Dale said, Michael, I was just thinking about you. It was something I've been wanting to talk to you about. and and the acceptance was complete. I mean, I planned on staying there, and I was right to plan on staying there because they wouldn't have let me stay anywhere else.
Yeah.
And I lived in Lubbock for most of the rest of that year.
If I can just stop you here,
Sure.
Not for the whole show, but just for this part. Most people, unfortunately, have no idea of that scene or who Joe Ely or Butch Hancock or Jimmy Dale Gilmore are, which is quite unfortunate. My experience with them was not just something genuinely American, but something genuinely Texan, and something beyond that was just expressed a kind of freedom and a kind of just really genuine friendliness and openness and integrity, and a genuine caring where and I just kind of wanted to get across how not a shock, but what a giant what a very different scene this must have been for you from anything that you had experienced yet. Like you said, from that kind of provincial East Coast experience, and I think whoever's listening to this, if maybe I can add on a couple of songs or something, but if it's hard to describe what we're trying to get across here, and I think it would help people if they went and listened to some Butch Hancock or listened to some Joe Ely. It's kind of something that has passed. It's something you see on, if you've ever watched Austin City Limits, they appear on there sometimes. But that scene, which I guess most people know who Stevie Ray Vaughan is, and he came out of that era, I guess, but it's still a little bit different. And I just wanted to get
Ray, was blues and
right,
and
yeah,
and rock and blues and
yeah.
And
these guys had a kind of raucousness to them that a lack of stricture to their music that really expressed a kind of musical freedom where, like, you might have a solo in a song or something that is very by the book, but these guys would kind of just go off and it was a very live music, and I think that was something that didn't translate well into a larger audience, and I think that was part of it, is that this is a music best appreciated live. But go on, sorry.
No. That's a really Butch had a phrase he liked to use when he talk about somebody. He'd say he or she is a free spirit.
Yeah.
And these were free spirits,
yeah.
The women and the men, and not in the sense of licentious, not in the sense of drugs. Who had money for booze, much less drugs?
No, not at all.
Any drugs in this whole 14th Street scene. There wasn't even pot.
Yeah.
And we couldn't afford to drink. Really, we were pure in that sense. And play them some version of Butch's song, if I Was a Highway, or sometimes it's called Bluebird.
Well, I was gonna play that song that he did with Mars Lacouture, that duet that he did with her. I always liked that a lot, but I mean, yeah, there's
any of those.
Yeah,
any of those.
Yeah.
I mean, but Bluebird, I heard Butch singing Bluebird, and Jimmy Dale doing the harmonies and picking up a verse, and there it is, 1972. I've come back to this place that I'd never seen before, never barely heard of, and in the middle of nowhere. And I'm listening to this song, and I'm thinking, this is as good as anything anywhere. The stuff I'm hearing in this living room is as good as anything going on in this country right now.
Yeah.
Or going on in this country for the last 10 years. And I'm thinking, and I was thinking this is time. This is not retrospect. I am in a culture here that is of itself. It's not in Nashville country music. It's of itself. And what I'm hearing in this living room, even if it never leaves this living room, is as good as anything going on anywhere. And I'm staying here for a while because this is incredible, and Route 66 was right.
Yeah, it's something that even today I like when I knew we were going to be doing this period, and I went back and listened to some of those records, and it's something that today I just I can understand how you would feel that you needed to get back there, and that was what was going on right then, and it's something that you wouldn't find anywhere else, and that's where it was at. I mean, if you came across that scene, you would have a sense of freedom and genuineness that you wouldn't see anywhere else. And that, being American, I think too, it's kind of an understanding you might have, and yeah, the fact that there wasn't any vices involved with any of these people, that, somebody might drink a little too much or something like that, but these were, I don't have a good word for it, I mean, but kind of genuinely Christian people, for lack of a better word.
Well, they wouldn't call themselves that.
Yeah, I know, but you know what I mean.
They've been, but I know what you mean.
Yeah,
they've been raised in this very strict Christianity of the South and Southwest, and as Terry Allen put it, and I don't know if he came up with it originally, but as he put it, sex is filthy, dirty, awful, and you save it for the one you love. Jesus loves you, and he'll send you straight to hell. And that's the kind of Christianity they were taught. But yes, it was this, they were looking at alternatives to that in the mystic Christianity and in Sufi mysticism. But Free Spirits really says it, because they weren't, somebody asked me after Irene's death. Irene died when we were 60. We were the same age, 2 weeks apart. And somebody asked me after her death, well, was she a rebel? Because he didn't know us, this whole crowd. And I said, no, she wasn't rebelling anything. She was just wanting to be herself without obstruction. So she settled in New Mexico and built her own place and raised a daughter. And she wasn't rebelling. Mm-hmm. She was just couldn't be who she was in the strictures of the East and in the strictures of society. She could be who she was in her little home in New Mexico, and make crafts and grow gardens. She wasn't trying to prove anything to anybody.
Yeah.
She didn't care about being famous. And this was true of these. Nobody was trying to prove anything.
Yeah.
And they weren't trying to be licentious. Some people slept around a lot. Some people didn't sleep around at all. But it was generally thought in this group, in general, that if you were going to get high on LSD, maybe some of them tried it or this and that, but it wasn't a part of the culture. Our particular subculture. I don't mean the culture around us, in Lubbock or elsewhere. It was, if you can't reach it with your own mind and through your own efforts, then don't bother. So you're not going to reach it.
Yeah.
This is about not nirvana, but some kind of enlightenment. This is about looking for some sense of truth. This is about, they were escaping the strictures of the Christianity they'd been brought up in, and the strictures of the society they'd been brought up in.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they loved Texas. That's one of the things that really blew my mind. Most people I knew did not like where they came from. I have enormous love and hate for New York City, but dude, I want to spend the rest of my life on Decatur Street? No way.
Yeah.
but they loved Texas. They didn't necessarily love Lubbock. Not many people stayed there, but
well, that's another thing is I think that most people have a vision of Texas that is so calumniated or different than what we're talking about here is, and this is not the Texas that you're gonna get from the popular media for sure.
No, but they were. You have to put them in the context of Texas. They were Texans. They are Texans, but a particular substratum.
Yeah.
Texas hadn't been kind to them. They were as they were coming up in teenagers. The cops in Lubbock, Texas, made a war on teenagers all through the 50s and early 60s. And really, you read about it. And we published a book by Joe Ely called I published the book, and this was being 76's, my friend. I published the book, and at the moment can't remember the title. Reverb, R-E-V-E-R-B, Reverb, an Odyssey. And we published it, Jasmine and I, on Letters of 3 A.M. Press, and you can order it. Reverb, an Odyssey by Joe Ely, and it is about how the Summer of Love, 1966, how that was experienced in Lubbock, Texas, and on the road. And it's invaluable if you want to know about how this little circle, this little stratum of society was different from the overall Texas society. That society had raised them, but they hadn't come out the way that society wanted them to come out. So that's an interesting contrast. But these people were, yes, free spirits. They the music of these guys, and Joe Carroll Pierce, who's finally recognized as a songwriter equal to anybody in the Texas of her generation. They are much better known in France and Germany and the UK and Ireland and Australia than they are known in the United States. They draw big crowds in when they play in those places, and they have. I don't know if they're doing it now because we're old men now, but until fairly recently, they were touring in Australia and in Europe fairly regularly. So they did have an audience, a big audience, but not in the United States. And interestingly, their songs were not picked up and covered hardly at all by people in the United States. But and to this day, nobody knows what to call their music. The music of the Flatlanders and the group that is Joe Ely and Butch Hancock and Jimmy Dale Gilmore, and their independent music, the music of Joe Carroll Pierce, the music of Terry Allen. Nobody can quite classify it. You can't call it country. You can't call it Western swing. The music critics are benumbed with what to
So do you want to stop here and we can continue with the working for the paper in Austin or next time, or we could split up Austin into two, or?
Well, yeah, let's stop here. Next time we can go from Clarendon to Austin, and I think let's try to do Austin in one, but maybe we'll do it in more than one.
Okay, all right, yeah.
You know, there's a lot to be said about
Yeah,
Austin.
yeah. I was really looking forward to this part. So as long as you want, as much time as you want to take doing that, that's fine with me. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think Austin will take a couple anyway, because there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I really get about Austin back then is nobody cared about Austin but people who were there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to get across what we're talking about here. But yeah. We'll try.
Yes. And I'm glad you asked the question, Jazz. It's difficult to see the approach of this crowd to being intellectuals, because that's also what they were and are.
Yeah.
And the men are more famous than the women, but the women were, if anything, smarter, because they had to understand the men. The men didn't even try to understand the women, but I include myself in the men. But the women had to understand the men in that culture better than they were understood. And then some of them